Good morning, Revolution, everybody, and welcome to our stream. Good morning, Joel. Good morning, Brooklyn. Good morning, Scott. Very, very happy to have you join us this very fine Friday morning. I'm coming to you live from Washington, D.C. today, my second home, my first being Youngstown. But I moved here back in the day after I graduated from college for 2 or 3 years. Had a great, very strong, wonderful forming experience here. Joelle, happy to have you. Joelle is the chair of our Political Action Commission, member of our national board, and most importantly, she tells us chair of the Connecticut district of the Communist Party. And they have quite a party up there. So very happy to have you back with us. And Brooklyn, who now lives in Brooklyn, is co-chair of the Brooklyn Club. Brooklyn, welcome, and very happy that you're able to join us. And then my old friend Scott, our regular, who's upstate New York, longtime friend of Joe Biden, and my longtime foil. Well, maybe not so friendly with Joe these days. Uh, Joe's time has passed, and anyway, we'll talk about that a little bit later. Our subject this morning: Red Scare: How to Fight Back and Win. And if any organization has experience with the Red Scare in this country, it's the Communist Party. Starting with the Palmer raids way back in the 1920s, 10,000 people arrested, 500 deported. Fast forward to the 1950s, McCarthy period, Joe McCarthy from the state of Minnesota, and his henchman Roy Cohn, UAC, so on and so forth. And now we're possibly experiencing another edition of it with Mr. Trump, who sat at the feet of Roy Cohn. Got his life lessons from Roy Cohn and represents I was going to say the best, Joel, but the worst of that tradition. And you see some of them same tactics being employed. Let's start with Joel then. Joel, you grew up in the '50s, and like me, a red diaper baby, and tell us a little bit about what it was like to grow up then. Uh, I remember that. Well, I don't really remember it because I was knee high to a grasshopper at the time. But my grandma was hauled before UAC twice. Mom hauled before UAC twice. Grandma driven out of her church. So one time she was the head of the local NAACP. She was a member of the main Baptist church in Youngstown, and got dismissed and pushed away. She ended up in one of the old Garvey churches that were a tangent to the Garvey movement. What was it like for you back then, and uh, how does it compare to now?
Good morning, Joe. It's great to be here. And that's a question that I get all the time. How do you compare? Well, I come from a really tiny family. My mom, dad, and me grew up in Camden, New Jersey. It's relevant to the story because my father at the time was teaching. Well, I was born in '46, so I wasn't aware, but he was teaching in Philadelphia. Teachers made very tiny amount of money. So in the summer, he picked string beans and tomatoes for Campbell's soup. And at the end of that particular school year, the principal told him, "You're going to be hauled before HUAC, and if you don't testify, you will be fired." So he never went back. So his summer job became his job, and he worked at Campbell's Soup when I was growing up. My mom was constantly losing jobs. She couldn't keep it for more than usually a week because the FBI would come. She didn't have a high school degree, and so she was working these different kind of jobs she could get, and the FBI would come and tell the boss, let that girl go. So um, what I say is that period of time was a period of isolation. I remember walking down the street. If somebody was scared to be seen with, they would cross the street. It was that kind of a atmosphere. My mother became a Girl Scout leader because the Girl Scouts wouldn't let me in. Then nobody would let her hold the meetings. We ended up in a firehouse eventually. But those are just a couple of the. It was a very, very ugly, ugly time. And my point is that at that time, we did not, well, at that time, there was extreme isolation and many people and families lost their jobs and their careers. And you didn't have to be a communist. You just had to be somebody who stood for justice. Um, but at that time, we did not have what we have now, which is this movement that's not yet big enough, but it's growing and coming forward. We need that mass movement. We need the opposition, and that was not there at the time. There was the media. It was just one media, radio or TV or something like that. And so now we have social media. So it said, well, through the social media, all this right wing um, stuff is being spread. But also, if there's only one source of news, then that can dominate. And with the social media and all of that, we have an opportunity to fight back and make our voices heard. So I think this whole thing, we didn't want to be here. We sure didn't want to be here. But the whole thing is about making our voices heard, and we can turn this around.
I'm glad you said that, making our voices heard, because there was a lot of fear back then. I remember when we restarted the party in YCL, it was the Young Workers Liberation League back in Youngstown. There was a family that lived about 3 or 4 black blocks away. They had a furniture store business, used furniture. So, and they were, in and around the party, and so we were visiting people like that. And we went to visit this woman, and I needed to use the phone to call back home to tell my mother or somebody something. And all of a sudden she got really tense and she said, "Oh my goodness, don't use my phone." She thought she was still being tapped some 20 years later. There was that kind of atmosphere. Um, Scott, one of the consequences of what is happening has obviously been a of free speech, dampening of free speech. And you saw what happened with Kimmel and Colbert. Well, Kimmel's show is back. We'll see what will happen with Stephen Colbert. But my question to you is, the corporations have been capitulating one after another. Boom, 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 boom. Bending the knee, making payments, paying Trump, money and uh, plea agreements and all of that. That's not all that surprising. I mean, after all, they're in it for the money. It's all about the maximization of profit. They want to keep their businesses going and so on and so forth. But from your experience and in your neck of the woods, is this dampening effect happening down in the grassroots amongst everyday ordinary working people where you're from?
I don't think so. Um, I think there's actually kind of a contrary effect. You know, people are recognizing that uh, unusual and in some ways unprecedented things are happening that need to be talked about. And people are, the world is changing rapidly in often confusing and frightening ways. And there's a recognition that and working people have never just sat back passively and watched events unfold. They've always talked about them, analyzed them, thought about them, and I think we're seeing that develop. And I think Joel's right about making our voice heard. We have a role to play in that. We are a legitimate part of the political life of this country, including in places where you might not expect us. For example, in one of the little towns right by where I am, you wouldn't think of it as a place marked by the Communist Party, but one of the first communist elected officials in the country, Pete Cachone, was a city councilman in New York, was born 5 minutes away from where I live, grew up there, fought his high school principal for making cracks about Italian Americans, and then moved to New York and became a leader in the unemployed movement. Right, so our party's really entrenched in the life of this country, and I think we're finding that, building on it, and there's fear, sure, but there's also a determination to resist.
A little bit of fear, a whole lot of determination to resist. What about the folks Brooklyn, your cohort, folks you hang with, folks you know? Uh, do you think that the threats from Trump and the ICE raids and all of that how are people responding?
Definitely some fear, definitely some anger. I think a lot of us, right when he was elected, we kind of expected to be outraged. We kind of were preparing to fight. But what's interesting right now is I think a lot of people who thought maybe they wouldn't be so directly affected, it's starting to affect in ways that maybe they weren't expecting. And so I think that outrage is broadening because we expected the Trump administration to attack Black people. We expected them to go after pro-Palestinian protesters. We expected them to go after trans people. But now people are seeing white liberals, mainstream white liberals like Jimmy Kimmel, being affected. And I think that that's surprising to a lot of people. I saw somebody say online, oh, they're going after white men now, it's getting serious, which is kind of morbid, but it's true. I think that what we're seeing is that Jimmy Kimmel is going to be fine. We've seen he's already gotten his show back. But what's concerning is that there are vulnerable groups who in this country have been attacked since day one. And we don't know how they're going to be protected. I think that it seems like there are no limits right now to who the Trump administration is going to attack, to who the far right is willing to attack. And I am asking the question along with people in my circle, people on the left, even outside of the left. Do we only have the energy to boycott companies when somebody like Jimmy Kimmel is being targeted? Or can we also generate that energy and that support and those resources to all of these other vulnerable groups who have been attacked since day one, since even before day one?
It's a very, very important question, and it's one that we have to continue to elevate and push, because to the degree that we take up the struggles of the most vulnerable, the most oppressed, who are not a small group of people, you add up Black folk, you add up Latino, you add up people of different genders, you add up women, you add up the disabled. You're talking about a majority of people. So are you saying that this may have started off as a red scare, Brooklyn, but now it's turning into a blue scare now? And
I don't know if I would go. I don't know if I would call it blue scare, but what I think is that the struggle to fight for the protection of communists and our right to have the beliefs that we have, which are basic beliefs of equality and freedom for all people, that is connected to these wider struggles. You know, our belief that everybody should be equal is connected with the fight for DEI. It's connected with the fight for transgender people. It's connected with all of these different issues. So I think what sometimes liberals get wrong, and maybe they do it on purpose, I don't know, when they throw us under the bus along with the right wing who try to impose these red scare tactics, they're also throwing under the bus their entire base.
Throwing under the bus their entire base. I think that's a really strong point. Scott, there's clearly a new level of anti-communism and anti-socialism in the country. And we saw back in the day that anti-communism and anti-socialism had started with us. But as Jimmy Baldwin said to Angela Davis when she was arrested, if they come for you in the morning, they're coming for us at noon, you know? So everybody has a stake in this fight. And one of the things that they're trying to do now is to establish a mass ideological basis for fascism. Mass ideological basis for fascism. I read the other day that the superintendent of schools in Oklahoma, state superintendent, was requiring every school to set up a chapter of Turning Point USA. Then the boy got fired, thank God. And he warned them that if you didn't set it up, it was against the law. Can you imagine? This guy is a Christian nationalist, you know? Um, uh, so Scott, do you think that they're doing that here and establishing this mass basis for ideological basis for fascism? And if so, what does it look like, and how would you distinguish it from what happened in Germany or in Italy, and what's uniquely American and what's more generally within the framework of how fascism emerged internationally?
Yeah, I think so. To kind of get to that question, we need to look at how fascism comes to power, and how its power is structured. And Palmiro Togliatti, an Italian communist who watched the rise of fascism in Italy and went into exile, had some really insightful comments about it. He said that fascism, its organization, its political agenda is a ruling class agenda. It's the agenda of capital, and specifically, as Dimitrov said, that most reactionary section of the capitalist class. But to come to power, that class can't do it alone. They need to build a mass base among the people. And Togliatti goes on to say that the ideology of fascism is always heterogeneous because it doesn't really have an ideological core. It just has the concessions, the positions that are necessary to weld together the different social forces needed to make up its mass base. And certainly, so that's sort of generally, a general look at how fascism comes to power. In the United States, the specific U.S. character of our fascism is Christian nationalist. I think 100%. That's what we're seeing. And we got to say, Christian nationalist is also inseparable from white supremacy in this country. It's always white Christian nationalism, right? And that's kind of the core of this mass base that Trump is trying to build, or the ruling class is trying to build. We should also be attentive to points where the other section of the ruling class, the more liberal section, gets drawn into sort of compromises with this reactionary section. So around anti-communism, traditionally is the big one. I think that's actually a little less present now than it has been maybe in the past, but certainly around trans rights, around DEI, around repression of Palestine solidarity work, areas where a certain section of even the liberal anti-Trump ruling class is willing to kind of make concessions, say, oh yeah, maybe we need to back off on trans rights, maybe we need to back off on affirmative action. Palestine solidarity is anti-Semitic, maybe we should, right? So we got to also be attentive to where the other section of the ruling class gets pulled in.
Interesting. So you're saying that it's ideologically eclectic, that there are many different streams that come together and then cohere into a general.
And
you have racism, you have anti-Semitism, you have homophobia, you have Islamophobia, you have great power chauvinism or extreme nationalism, interacting in this general milieu, if I can put it that way. Joel, when Trump first got elected, I expected to see, like we saw in 2016, big outpouring, people marching down the street shouting, "Not my president," but unfortunately, at least where I was, you could hear a pin drop in the immediate days. There was shock in the country, I think. But that's changed, as Brooklyn and you and Scott have indicated. Do you think that the resistance is rejecting these anti-McCarthy, these pro-McCarthy, anti-communist, anti-socialist, uh, uh, anti-democratic trends, and has it gelled together enough to do what needs to be done? Is the street heat hot enough that it's going to put us in a position to beat them back in the coming months, and most particularly in the 2026 midterms? Or is it too soon to tell?
Well, first of all, I agree with you. There was shock at first. And also at first, we have to remember that the initial legislation that Trump MAGA got through Congress was the Lake and Riley bill, which scapegoated and dehumanized the immigrant community. And that was just to open the floodgates for this horrible mass deportation that's taking place. What's happening now is that this repression is bringing people together, and I see it very dramatically in Connecticut. Immigrant groups who even hadn't worked with each other have come together, but also come together with the broader community. And the most exciting part is the role of the labor movement right now, because, capitalism can't deliver for the people. And the extremes of race and economic inequality are growing. And so what's happening is that the labor movement is beginning to take its proper place in the struggle. And I brought a prop, which is this sign, I hope you see it, "We can't keep up." And on the other side, it says, "Yale, pay your fair share." I was at a rally yesterday. It was one of the most tremendous rallies, no matter what period of time. And there was 2,000 workers in the street with the community as well, and integrating the fight this was the fight for the contracts of the service and maintenance and clerical and technical workers, and the organizing. Now, the graduate teachers have organized. Now, the postdocs, it was announced yesterday, just have enough cards. They're unionizing, and the teachers union. And we just came off a big strike with the machinists union. So my point is, I'm not trying to get on a tangent here, but it's at the bottom of it. My point is that the organizing day to day to stand up for our needs as a working class, as a multiracial working class, is what's going to turn this around, what's happening on the ground. But we need the big mass mobilizations. And I do believe that October 18 it has the potential to be another turning point. I hope so, because I see from where I'm sitting here in Connecticut, but looking around the country, I see organizational commitment and actual turnout and connecting to local struggles around the No King's Day 2 that hadn't happened previously. So I hope that begins to answer the question. But yes, the mass mobilization is crucial, and it is beginning to take shape. And no, we can't predict, but we can sure hope make history happen. And I just have to end with one thing that I had wanted to say in the first question, which is I always quote and remember Martin Luther King Jr., because as he evolved, he also understood and took on red baiting and the Red Scare. And he connected racism, labor hating, and red baiting as the triple evils. And that is a lesson that I believe has never gone away and that we are drawing on at this moment.
Yeah, I remember Martin said in that famous speech he gave at 1199, he said, the race baiter is the labor hater. The race baiter is always the labor hater. Brooklyn, Joel spoke about this mass mobilizations that are beginning to take shape. And I always have believed, Brooklyn, that it takes a mass movement to defeat a mass movement. It takes a mass movement to defeat a mass movement. From where you sit, I live in New York City, like you do. It looks to me like there's a mass movement developing around the Mamdani campaign. You know, people are sick and tired of Eric Adams with his corrupt, trifling self. You know, people are tired of Andrew Cuomo, you know, with his sexually corrupt and trifling self. They're just tired of all of the old politics and they're grabbing hold onto something new. And amongst young people, there's a lot of excitement about that, you know. And it seems like the anti-communism and the anti-socialism have dropped significantly. You know, is your generation going to be the new red generation that's going to take us? Well, first of all, am I right? And number two, is your generation going to be the generation that's going to, you know, develop a socialist movement into a mass movement nationally across the country?
I think yes, absolutely. And it's really exciting. I'm lucky that I get to live in a state like New York where this is kind of a conversation that's actually happening. It's really exciting, and it's also kind of hilarious when you hear some of these news reports on like Fox and the like talking about how Mamdani is calling for free buses and free childcare, and they'll be like, how could these people support something so evil? Or they'll be talking about how young people now, most of us hold favorable views of socialism, and it's like when they talk about it, they're trying to demonize. What they're trying to demonize is healthcare for all, free and affordable college, debt relief, rent freezes, or like nicer parks, and they'll talk about it like it's the devil. But I think, contrary to some people's beliefs, that young people are not stupid. Most of us are not naive. A lot of right wingers will try to say to young people, like, you're not being realistic, socialism doesn't work, you didn't live through the Cold War, blah, 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 blah. But I think it's true that we don't have the same experiences as older generations, and what we, Gen Z, I think I'm right on the cusp of Gen Z and millennial, that what we have lived through is particular to us and has shaped our worldview in a particular way. And our what we have experienced has let us know that there is a problem with the system. And we're not interested in making the same mistakes as older generations. We want to end the climate crisis. We want to take actual action on common sense gun laws. We're approaching our third recession, some of us not even 30 years old. We've grown up and seen war after war in the Middle East. We're seeing our money being used to fund a genocide. And on top of all of this, they want us to work hour after hour after hour, day after day after day without getting anything back. To us, I think it's ridiculous and insulting that people would expect us to put up with this for the rest of our lives. They try to talk about young people as being lazy or that we just don't work hard enough. But what we're saying is that we have come to terms with the fact that hard work in this country with this current system doesn't equal success. We've seen our hardworking parents struggle. Me personally, I grew up seeing my parents work multiple jobs, still struggling at the end of the day to get by. And I've seen them work all my life, and yet they didn't get to achieve that American dream, or at least in the way that it was sold to them. So I think that this mass movement that's happening, not just in New York City, I think New York City is just one of the sparks that's happening around the country, is just representative of a lot of young people and some older people too, who have seen our current system for so long. And we're ready to try something new. We're ready to tackle these issues in a different way, not just putting Band-Aids over big problems, not just with thoughts and prayers, not with any of that, but with real systematic action and change.
Good points. Good points. Fired up, ain't taking it no more. Want something new, something different, and we're reaching out and grabbing for it. And we don't care what you say. Joel, let me ask you a question. Don't you think that isn't it a danger to overstate the threat of fascism, um, and risk demobilizing the mass movement? You know, if you go too far, people retreat, kind of go into their ideological, emotional, you know, spaces, bunkers. Um, do you think that we overstated it in the 50s? And was that in part one of the reasons that the party, uh, that the attack, uh, kind of effectively for a number of years put the work of the party in a deep freeze? And if so, what are some of the lessons of that for today?
Well, yes, you can overstate the threat of fascism to the point that people are afraid to speak out. But as far as a critique of the 1950s, I wouldn't put it in those terms myself. As I say, it was a different circumstance. Well, you had the HUAC and all that. Today we have, it's the Congress, the President, and the Supreme Court and all. But it was a different atmosphere and a different climate. I think, and from where I sit, that our party put up a valiant fight and did the best it could. And in any situation, you have to examine the circumstances and and make your best decisions. And maybe there are decisions that were made that could have been made differently. But that was not. I think that the Communist Party in the 50s was actually at the heart of organizing against the execution of the Rosenbergs and standing up for people's rights. So I wouldn't place the onus onto the Communist Party. I'm not saying you did, but I'm just saying that has been done. And I think today, yes, we have to call it like it is. And I think, Joe, in one of your, I don't know if it was the convention or the National Committee, you weren't afraid to talk about the fascist threat. I think that was extremely important. But I think we have to place it into the context. I love what Brooklyn was saying. Look, the policies are not popular. The policies that are leaving youth with no future, that are taking away any kind of hope for security from all generations, they're not popular. That big, ugly bill, it does not have majority support on any of the specific policies in there. So you saw that 40%, Adelita Grijalva, it was an extremely important election that happened Tuesday in Tucson, Arizona. She won by 40% against a MAGA candidate. So I think that I'm trying now to remember how you phrased the question, because I'm afraid I got a little bit onto another tangent here, Joe. But I think as far as overstating the threat of fascism, that I want to appreciate you and our party for putting it out there in the beginning in a way that says, this is not here. It depends on our ability to organize and mobilize in order to not only turn around the threat of fascism, no, that's not enough, but to actually go onto the offensive for the things that we need and a bright future and the hopes for tomorrow and overcoming this capitalism. That's the whole frame that we need to put. And I think that's where Mamdani is getting the response. And I think that's where our own candidates, we have candidates running around the country, and they're getting the response. And they're building coalitions. So they're overcoming the isolation that was enforced during the 1950s. I hope that helps.
It does help a lot. And one of the things that we want to end with, because we're almost at the end, is how do we win? How do we, Scott, fight back and win? And one of the things that happened in the 50s is that, not at all to blame the party, because we were under very severe attack, but there was still room, I think, to struggle. And there may have been an overestimate of the danger. And when the Smith Act went down and so on and so forth, and Gus went to jail, and when he went to jail, Claude went to jail, Elizabeth Gurley Flynn went to jail, and so on and so forth for the crime of thinking. And so, in your opinion, Scott, what are the main takeaways about a successful strategy for moving forward? And then Brooklyn to you, and Brooklyn, you'll have the last word.
Well, I'm going to leave the big strategic picture maybe to Brooklyn and focus in more on that question of overcoming the isolation that both you and Joel have raised. One story that always sticks with me is from a comrade called B. Lumpkin. She's now 107 years old. And I forget what year it was, but during that time of sort of ferocious repression, she and her husband moved to a new city, and they were both party members, very active organizers. Known. They were followed by the FBI. So they moved into this new neighborhood, and they knew that it was only a matter of time before the FBI showed up, started trailing them, started trying to cut them off from their community. And what B says is, how did we deal with that? We went to the city council meeting, and we got involved in the most basic, most immediate struggle of the people in our community, which I think, if I remember correctly, was a struggle for improvements to the municipal sewage system or something like that. But the point was, you can't be cut off from the people if you're standing with the people and fighting with the people, and that is one of the primary ways that we can beat this attempt by the ruling class, by the fascist forces, to cut us off.
Great answer. Brooklyn, to you. How do we fight back and win?
I think the most obvious answer is by sticking together. We talked a lot about mass movements in this episode and in previous episodes, and I think that it can't be overemphasized enough that we are stronger together. I think back when talking about the Red Scare, I also think about the Lavender Scare and about how these fascist movements try to divide us as much as they can. They try to implement these social divisions, whether it be racism or homophobia or transphobia, in order to make us weaker, in order to make us smaller and less strong. And so I think that the lesson that we can learn from that is that we shouldn't let them divide us on any level like that. We need to be vigilant when it comes to chauvinism in our spaces. We need to be vigilant when it comes to protecting the most vulnerable among us, as I was talking a little about before. I think that solidarity and unity are some of the strongest tools that we can take with us when going into this fight.
It's one of the strongest tools that we can take going into this fight. Scott's story about B and Frank Lumpkin uh, was brought home to me by the experience that my mom and dad had on the south side of Youngstown, because they too were very deeply involved in the community and trade union struggles. And you couldn't find a struggle that they weren't involved in, whether it was public schools, or if it was welfare rights, or if it was housing, or if somebody got their gas cut off, or their water cut off, or the street lights, or a woman got jumped on and beat up. Whatever it was, they were there with our neighbors, and their families, and the guys and women we went to school with, and they were fighting on their behalf. And I remember years later, when I was a grown man, a woman that my mother worked with in Absalom, she said, "Joe, when I first met your mother back in the day in the cities, I didn't know about this New Yorker coming into Youngstown. I was wondering who and what she was." And she said, "You know what? Now I have no questions whatsoever, because she saw Mom there selflessly, day in and day out, you know, working on the issues, building united fronts without preconditions. You didn't care whether you were a Republican or a Democrat or an independent, a Christian or a Baptist, uh, or a Muslim, or if you were Jewish. If you were hurting, if you had a problem, it was our problem, and we fought for the least of these, and those are the kinds of lessons that we have to bring into the popular front against fascism, to heal the wounds that developed over the course of the last several months. And key to it, I think, is bringing the working class and trade unions into the fight. Well, that does it for this edition of Good Morning Revolution. I cannot end without doing a little commercial uh, for Joelle's book. She and Lisa Armstrong wrote a book about Joelle's experience running as a candidate in the 70s and 80s in New Haven as a party candidate. And we have to have more. And we're starting to get it now, more party candidates. And that's going to be key to helping us spread the word and build our movement. Before we close, we need to end on a somber note. We heard this morning that Sister Comrade Asada Shakur passed away today in Cuba, where she was living in exile. Asada Shakur was falsely accused of killing a police officer in New Jersey, and fled the country, and had been living in exile in Cuba for many decades. And so our condolences in the first place to her family and to her comrades, And our thanks to the Cuban Communist Party and the people of Cuba for giving her safe harbor and safe refuge. And we're fighting for a society where we don't have to run, where we can stand and be present and be free. Until next week, siblings, comrades, friends, stay strong, stay safe, stay in the fight. Thank everybody this morning, Joelle, Brooklyn, and Scott, for your contributions. See y'all next week.